If you're serious about actually starting to use the Japanese language instead of just having a brag-worthy Duolingo streak, this is a video you don't want to miss. If you're new here, my name is Yuki. I'm a lawyer and YouTuber based in Hong Kong, and I'm a self-certified language learning junkie. My latest obsession is learning Japanese. For those of you who have maybe just found me, here's a quick recap. I created an impossible goal to learn Japanese in 2 months, a while back, and I booked a trip to Japan at the end of the 2-month period. The goal was to learn enough Japanese to get by during the trip and come out of the other side being conversational. Instead of doing a vlog-style video which may bore everybody to death, I've decided to pack all the insights I've gained into this one video to help fellow Japanese learners take that first step towards speaking Japanese in real life with locals. When it comes to speaking a language in real life, a question that always comes up is, how will I know that I'm ready for it? If you're watching this video, I am 99% confident that you are ready. You're either learning Japanese or have the desire to start. You have the desire of using the language with real people in real life. Those are really the only prerequisites. The rest are just tactics. If you're the remaining 1% who hasn't caught the Japanese bug yet or is kind of on the fence, keep watching and maybe you'll convert by the end of this video. The threshold for starting to speak Japanese in real life is surprisingly low. You need maybe about 10 seconds to learn the phrase konnichiwa, and maybe about 5 minutes to perfect the intonation and pronunciation. I know you're thinking, meh, it's just greetings, it's no big deal. I want to have real conversations with Japanese natives. How much Japanese do I need for that? Still, I would argue, a lot less than you think. Most real-life conversations are not like a talking head YouTube video where you're just talking and talking into the void. Most real-life conversations are highly predictable. Ordering food and asking for recommendations. Making small talks about where you came from and where you're going. Talking about the weather. Commenting on the nice views and delicious food. You can learn and master that with just a few YouTube videos. You may think learning a language is about learning the right words to refer to things and the correct way to string those words together to convey meaning. You're right, but I would argue, even more importantly, learning a language is about making an effort to create meaningful interactions. It doesn't have to be perfect in order to be meaningful. For example, if after I finish a meal I say, "Gochisousama deshita," even with a very strong accent, the other person would understand that I appreciate the efforts they've made to prepare the meal for me, and I've taken the effort to learn a bit of the language to thank them properly. Even if you're just using single words to begin with, even if your grammar is all over the place, the locals will still appreciate your effort and try their best to make sense of what you're saying. So you need to get rid of the idea that you need to reach X level or pass N3 or N2 in order to start having Japanese conversations with the locals. You don't need permission to start. You can just make a list of scenarios that you think you might encounter and then sit down for a week or 2 weeks in a row to learn the words and phrases you may need for those scenarios. And then go out there and practice. To prove this point, I have a quick story to share. With only 2 months worth of Japanese under my belt, I had this really interesting encounter in Kawagoe at a place that sells senbei, a traditional rice cracker. According to the sign outside of the shop, this shop was established in the year Meiji 40, i.e. 1907. I was greeted by this old lady who couldn't really stand up straight anymore but was really friendly and sweet. She offered me some samples to try and I bought some. As I was paying, she tried to make some small talks with me and it went something like this. 一人ですか? ええ、一人です。香港から来ました。昨日友達と一緒に旅行します。そうですね。友達と旅行しました。はい。でも今日は一人です。すごいですね。どうもありがとうございます。As you can see, I could only say the simplest thing. I couldn't even conjugate properly. I said 旅行します rather than 旅行しました. But the little bit of Japanese I spoke made the interaction possible. Little moments like this remind us of why we're even learning languages in the first place. Insight number 2, focus on pronunciation. Now that we've got the fundamental mindset stuff out of the way, it's time to address the more technical aspect. What aspects of the language should we focus on if we want to start speaking to locals as quickly as possible? The answer is obvious. If you want to have conversations with people, you have to make sure that you're understood. Yes, vocabulary and grammar are important, reading and writing are important, but if you have to pick, the number one priority must be pronunciation. It does you no good to so-called know a word if you then go on and butcher the pronunciation so badly that people don't know that you're using that word. To wrap your head around this, you only have to search your memory for a time when a foreigner tries to speak your first language and you fail to understand them. As a native Cantonese speaker, while I have massive respect and appreciation for anyone who's trying to learn my language, I find it extremely hard to make out what the other person is saying, even if the pronunciation is just a little bit off. This is exacerbated because Cantonese is a tonal language. For example, CC means current affairs, CC means private affairs, and CC means to try. But you get the idea. You might also have the experience of not being able to understand someone, even though if they slow down and say individual words, you can make out those words. And that's because the music of the language isn't quite right. We recognize our own language not by individual words, but by the music it creates. The highs need to be high and the lows need to be low. The long sounds need to be long and the short sounds need to be short. Otherwise, we can't understand it very well. Now, wearing your Japanese hat again, it should be pretty obvious that you need to know how a word is pronounced, not only individually, but also in whole phrases. This is not optional. If you don't do this, even if you memorize every hiragana and katakana that makes up the phrase, it's not going to sound right. The other person would find it difficult to understand you. On the flip side, if the general shape of the phrase sounds right, people are much more likely to understand, even though in fast speech you can't really tell the difference between a ji and a chi or a te and a de. So, how do you work on that? My personal recommendation is PIMSO courses. This is not sponsored, by the way. I don't even know if they do sponsorships, but it has helped me immensely and was instrumental to me feeling confident enough to start speaking Japanese to local people, even just after learning the language for 2 months. The basic idea is that it's an audio-based course that teaches you words and phrases in made-up scenarios. For example, it tells me that I'm an American woman sitting next to a Japanese man on a plane. Immediately creates a mental image in your head. It then gives me small chunks of words and phrases to work through. If it's a new phrase, PIMSO will break it down sound by sound for me to repeat before linking them up. If it's a phrase that I've already learned, it will ask me to try to say it, pause, and then repeat it in perfect Japanese. It sounds kind of silly, but it works wonders for getting used to hearing and making sentences from day one and building up from there, all the while getting high quality audio input from native Japanese speakers. It is easy to recognize the musical shape of a phrase even before you've learned all the individual words in that phrase. Lessons build on top of each other. For example, if in one lesson I'm taught how to say どうやって使うんですか? How do I use this? Then maybe in the next lesson, I'll be asked to guess how to say how do I go? どうやって行くんですか? And it's not divided by topics. So I've never had to sit through 30 minutes of naming every relatives I've ever had, or counting from 0 to 10 million, or naming every sports that I could possibly engage in. All the vocabulary and grammar items are taught in context. For example, instead of learning that 結婚 means marriage, I was taught the phrase 息子は日本人と結婚しました. My son is married to a Japanese person. I don't have a son, but I did briefly when I was that American woman, flying to Japan and speaking to the Japanese man next to me. And now I know how to use the master form of kekkon in an actual sentence. I'm aware that there are other learning resources that also focus on learning sentences rather than individual words. For example, I've used Glossica for a different language. Personally, I prefer the PIMSO method because I found that the role-playing element helped the lesson stick better than just simply drilling using spaced repetitions. Insight number 3, create a concrete challenge. Do you know why you're not speaking Japanese in real life yet? It's because you haven't really made up your mind that it's going to happen. Unless you happen to live in Japan or work with a Japanese person, you wouldn't magically stumble upon a chance to speak Japanese. You may have a surprise encounter like I did in an onsen somewhere in Taiwan. You can catch up here if you've missed that episode. But if you haven't made up your mind that you're going to speak Japanese, you would have let the chance pass you by anyway. So, my advice is, go book your trip or your italki session now. Circle in bright red the date that you will start having conversations in Japanese. Once you do this, someday will become a particular day and everything will come into sharp focus. It's like sign up for a marathon race. Your mind is a planning machine and it will try its best to help you prepare for the challenge. This is the concept of an impossible goal that I've talked about in my last video. To focus your mind, you need a very hard goal or a very concrete challenge just around the corner. The concrete challenge that I've created for myself is a trip to Japan only 2 months after I've started learning the language. And it's not just any trip, it's a trip where I will start speaking Japanese to the local people. Because of that goal, while I was in Tokyo, I was actively looking for situations where I can use my limited Japanese skills. I tried ordering food in Japanese, even though I could probably get by just by pointing at the menu. And here's me ordering curry.
はい、お願いいたします。お待たせいたしました。これ、一つで、お疲れでした。
Spicy, rice normal.
Oh, okay.
はい、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
And as your experience builds, your identity will shift gradually. Every time you choose to speak Japanese instead of English, your tracks will deepen a little bit and it makes it more and more natural to travel down that path. Before you know it, instead of someone who's hoping to speak Japanese someday, you are someone who speaks Japanese sometimes. And I think that's pretty cool. いつかは今です。Insight number 4. Learn restaurant Japanese first. This is a tip for people who are looking to start speaking Japanese on a trip to Japan. Maybe it's because Japanese cuisine is my favorite food in the world, but I think the most likely place where you will start speaking Japanese on a trip to Japan is in a restaurant. You can learn to order food confidently by watching a 10-minute YouTube video, and that will be the single best use of your time. I'll link a few video recommendations below if you're interested. Another tip is to really practice your katakana. While in Meguro, in a really cool cafe, I ordered a slice of Basque cheesecake and a matcha latte. In Japanese, the pronunciation is almost identical. It's Basque cheesecake to matcha latte. お願いします. You can read quite a lot of items on a all-Japanese menu, even if your kanji isn't quite there yet. This tip has really helped me because even though I already know quite a lot of kanjis due to my Chinese background, most of the time I have no idea how these kanjis are pronounced in Japanese. I guess I have to address the elephant in the room. Did I manage to learn Japanese in 2 months? Well, not really. I learned some Japanese in 2 months. I managed to have some simple but interesting conversations with the locals in Japanese, and I could make myself understood. Frankly, I have exceeded my own expectations, because compared to myself learning other languages, my progress on Japanese was really quick and visible. So I've decided that for the rest of this year, I will focus on learning Japanese. I will not fall for the shiny object syndrome and go chase after a different language just yet. And I think later in the year, I'll probably put in place another concrete challenge to make sure that I stay on track and to make even greater progress. So I've been talking for ages, and here's a really quick recap. If you want to start speaking Japanese with locals in real life, here are my top tips. Number 1, accept it as a fact that you are ready for the challenge. Number 2, obsess over pronunciations before anything else. And for this, I recommend you check out Pimsleur courses. Number 3, create a concrete challenge and commit to it. So go and book that trip, book that italki session now. And number 4, if you are to learn anything, learn restaurant Japanese first. So if you're intrigued by this video and you'd like to learn more about the backstory of me trying to learn Japanese in 2 months, you can go and check out this series. As always, thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!